So we're part way into our first book of the Luxury Library. The iconic novel that has continued to capture readers since 1818 when it was first published. It's an old story, but it appeals to the imaginations of each new generation, torn between longing and rejection, cast out by our world and with none of his own to turn to. Frankenstein. We're at the stage of the book now where we're sanding up the sides, getting them nice and smooth and even. You want to start with something like a 400 grit sandpaper, and you work your way to an 800 or 1000 grit. The higher the numbers go, the finer the little grains, because it's the number of grains per square inch, I think. But you get a nice high number, and that means it's a little fine, a bit smoother really, less chunky. So this is an 800. I'm just polishing up that side, finishing it. Feels nice and smooth. Now I have to point out here, you notice our little zigzag pattern that we had before? Well, it's gone. And the reason it's gone is, I have to confess, a bit of a whim on my point. I was in the print shop and I was cutting the edges off of some really old books, and I had this one with me, big industrial cutter there like this one. And I thought, well, why don't I take the edges off and then I can show you how to color the edges. You can sand down, cut and then sand down that zigzag end. It takes a long time. But if you have a good cutter, then you can chop it like this nice and fine. So this one is a bit of a cheat, but it allows me to show you this. I'm using basically a student grade watercolor here, just those little solid ones you use in school. I don't recommend you do that. It just doesn't adhere very well. Ideally, you get an acrylic paint that's artist's or professional grade, and it'll work a lot better. So now we're on to the cover. I have an idea in mind. First thing I do is map out some spaces on the cover. It's not necessarily exactly where everything's going to be. Sometimes I do that, but this one I just want a general idea of kind of the eye line. Pun intended, which you won't understand for a minute, but you will. I want to put just the monster's yellow eyes on the front here. They won't be yellow, it'll just be in the leather, but I'm going to kind of sculpt a little bit of his face. There we go. They say the eyes are the window to the soul. Does this guy have a soul? When you read the book, you'll want to watch for themes of God's responsibility to people and peoples to God, and whether or not that's a fair deal or not. There are a lot of questions that Mary Shelley seems to be asking. What I'm going to do, you don't have to be any major artist. I'm just going to sketch out in broad strokes the ridge is between his eyebrows and the wrinkle on his nose. And then just work down, keeping things more or less symmetrical. This isn't a drawing or a sketch or anything like that people are going to see. It's more guidelines for the sculpting that I'm going to do. So I'm just having a look at that picture on my computer and then transferring the general basic lines to my paper here in such a way that it fills up the front of this cover the way I want it to. I don't want the whole cover filled up, just a little panel about a third of the way down. Next step is find those points of the eyes. Make sure that they're the same on both sides. For a Frankenstein's monster, I actually could make them uneven, or for different kinds of monsters, that would be fine. Or if you're trying to make a particularly unattractive human being, eyes at a different level will do that. But I didn't want to draw anything away from our feeling of empathy with this monster's plight, because he was basically created and then his creator abandoned him to his own devices. And that's one of the themes that this story is covering. So I want to kind of be thinking as I'm doing this, which parts am I going to cut down and which am I going to keep out? I'm going to try a new technique. I'm not even sure at this point whether it will work or not. But I'm just wanting to make sure that there's a sense of emotion in these eyes a little bit. And then the Dremel with the little grinder wheel on it. I just start taking away what doesn't need to be there. Any indentations in the face, a light indentation on the paper, on the gray board. And I have a look at it, go a little deeper, have a look at it, go a little deeper. I don't recommend you do this inside. It started to, the dust that it kicked up started to irritate me a little bit. It might even be toxic, I don't know. So it wasn't too long into it that I decided to move outside, which turned out to be quite a nice little afternoon. It's not a fast process grinding in front of the image like that, but I think it's worth it. Looks pretty good so far. So I popped outside and finished it on the front deck. Beautiful day. You can see the ocean in the background, nice and calm and blue. Tons of birds running around, rabbits hopping around in the field in front of me. Myna birds, which will scare the tar out of you if you don't know they're there and they burst into their call. And little tiny bright red and bright yellow birds flying around quite often. And then up where we are, there are fairy terns as well, which are kind of a graceful seagull looking bird that can hover. And they flit all around in those trees around the house. And the neighbors are dropping my daughter off back home. And them gone, we're back to it. I don't like it too hot, but there's a nice breeze today, so it's not too bad at all sitting outside. I'm going to do that again, I think. I think we're getting close. I don't need it to be too deep. I don't even want it to be too perfect. I just want enough indentation that the leather can sink right in there. I made the lines a bit wider than they would need to be if this were just its own surface. But because I'm adding a millimeter of leather to it, it's going to make any divots in there a millimeter smaller on either side. So 2 millimeters smaller. We'll see how that turns out. Now I want a little indentation box where the Frankenstein title will go. By the way, my gold tools arrived and we are ready to start gold tooling. I was messing around with it a little bit today. It is pretty tricky, but we'll get it. So I had glued a second layer on the back of this to give some support on it when I was carving, grinding the sculpture portion out there. So as I cut away the top layer of the board, I glued it on just along the ridge on the right-hand side so I can put the ruler in between, kind of kick it up, and get in there where I can lift that board out. It was after that that I remembered that the book I made doesn't have the paper insert in the front. It's just got the 3 little tabs. So I'll pull that apart later, but for now, I'll just make sure that the opening is nice and smooth and clean in the front. Now we have it in the vise, and we want to put these little pieces in here to give a flat plane where we can glue the hollow on. I know I said I wasn't going to do a hollow, and then I was in the library looking at book after book after book that didn't have a hollow and was split right down the spine. And I thought, this might be fine for 10 or 20 or even 30 years, but I want it to last longer than that. So I'm going to put a hollow on, and hopefully that will extend that life a little longer. There is a good chunky layer of glue on this spine though already, so that will help as well. Now I numbered these and then I put them on upside down, which doesn't matter because it's even spacing, but it's just indicative of the way this book's gone. It's had some issues. I'll talk about that later. You notice with the marks on the outside of the signatures, even when it's here in the vise, it's very easy to tell where the top is. Which you might think, what does that matter? Obviously, these things can go upside down. It's no problem. And for most things, it doesn't matter. But in a minute, I'm going to put on a bookmark. And if you put the bookmark on the bottom, it'll still work, but it's a bit weird. Truthfully, it would probably work better because then the little dangly bit's just sticking out the top instead of always getting folded up and tangled underneath. But it would look weird. None of them are ever like that. So we're going to bow to tradition, bow to the man, and attach our lavender bookmark at the top. Now the lavender and green is a bold choice, but it's the only ribbon I had at the house. And I didn't want to go into town just to get a little bit of ribbon for this one. And I think actually it'll look all right. We'll get a nice little color combo. Hopefully not clownish, but bold enough with that burgundy trim, the burgundy headband and tailband, the lavender ribbon and the green sides. It's kind of mashed together like the Frankenstein monster is mashed together. And I love that green thread and those bandage tapes sticking out. It all suits this book very well, I think. I always cut the pre-made end bands too wide. I'd like to say that's on purpose and it's out of caution. You can always cut it down, but you can't add. But in truth, just poor at measuring when it comes to these things. I always think I need a little bit more than I do. But you don't want, because then that gets a bit messy when the book's complete. Doesn't look great. So here we have it, the text block, except for the hollow, is ready to rock. And I'm almost loath to cover up this nice construction, but it's time. Measure the width there. And of course, we cut this paper 3 times that width that we measured so that we can fold it over and make a little tube, a little hollow tube. This is stiff paper and it's not cooperating. But there we go, a little bullying. Sorry, paper. There we go. I'm not using the bone folder for that. I could, but I just decided to use the edge of my fingernail in this moment. Again, you want to make sure that it's even on both ends. Once it's glued in place, it will be able to flex and kind of settle into its situation, but we want to give it as good an opening seating as we can. Again, we don't want the glue right to the ends because we don't want it to squish over the opening and seal up the hollow. That would make it not function very well. So there we go. Nice little hollow. It'll go on the back. We could build up this back so it's solid all the way along. I often do that. In this case, the paper's sturdy enough, and I think our construction with the leather is going to be strong enough. Why did you glue the ends, you might ask? I have no answer for you. It's just one of those jobs, one of those books. Yeah, spilled glue. About 4 tablespoons of it, I would guess, before I snatched the thing back up. Had a little clean session. There we go. So we'll open that up, slide the book out. Here we have our text block. Got that ribbon flat and tucked away. Keep it safe and also out of the way for us. And that's ready for the cover to go on. Let's start with the back cover. Always work back and bottom to front and top. Now this board you'll see has some damage on it. This is the one that I had glued to the back of the Frankenstein face. And it's defaced a little bit, but it's not deep cuts or anything like that. So it'll function fine. Line it up and just get an idea for where that needs to sit. The edges of the board line up really well with the tops of the end bands, the headband and tailband. They're pretty much flush, but because we'll also have a millimeter of leather on the top and the bottom, that means that we'll get a little bit of buffer over top of those end bands, which is just what we want. And they'll sit and protect the edges of that text block. All right, let's get this thing glued up. I did manage to dry enough glue on this brush for long enough that the tips of it hardened right up and I couldn't get them to soften up again. So I trimmed them off, and it's just not the same. It's a bit too stiff. I have a smaller one, but for a job this big, I want the wider brush. I will keep my eyes open for a replacement, or I might buy a pair on Amazon and have them take the slow 3-month journey on the boat to the island. We're making good progress in the library with rescuing books and redoing books. I'll have another project coming out on one of those before too long, but I have a couple other things that I want to do first. I have a commission that I want to show you, and then I have, it's not really a commission. There you see it lining up nice with the end bands and that guideline that I drew. Once everything's in place, spread out these little bandagey threads and just drop them into that tacky glue. Spread out like fingers. There we go. Try not, if you've got something similar to this material, try not to have them cross over or twirl up, because that makes them twice as thick or 3 times as thick sometimes. So you want to have them just one layer, and then when you press these boards together with the glue, it'll all kind of squish together. It'll all squish together into a nice, neat package. There we go. As I was saying, the other jobs I want to do, one of them is just a book that I want to make for another YouTuber that I watch. There's no affiliation there, and it's not any big high-powered channel. Just a nice channel that I enjoy about a bookshop in France. So I'm going to make a book that I think she would enjoy and send it to the bookshop. Hopefully that'll be a nice surprise. I want to make one as well for Wild Homestead, for James Alof's on Wild Homestead. He's a history buff and a fellow Canadian, also lived in Asia for nearly a decade, same as I did. And I think he would enjoy a nice leather band Marcus Aurelius or something like that. So if any of you know him, I did reach out in the comments, but he's a big enough channel that I don't think he necessarily sees all the comments himself. Or maybe takes the offer of a leather book seriously, I don't know. The bookstore one is nice because I can just send it to her, and if she never acknowledges it, that's fine. That's not why I'm sending it, but she doesn't have to feel like that's why I'm sending it, whereas he might. But if you know him, get on the horn. And if you don't, I highly recommend the channel. He's a homesteader in Toronto, Canada, doing some cool stuff. But anyway, I digress. Here I'm working on the front end now, and I'm doing that little guideline. That's about the minimum space I would leave between the front or back cover board and the spine. You need room for it to bend, for the leather to form a hinge between them. I'm enjoying this larger cutting mat a lot. Gives me a nice big space to work on. When I'm back in Oxford, I'll probably invest in the 1x2 meter version and put her on a table and set up a proper book bindery again. Although I have to say, the one I have here at the house is growing. Different tools have arrived and different projects are possible now with them. We've just made it through a bit of a supply bottleneck, and we will be cranking out some more finished library books shortly. We were waiting on the trimmer at the print shop, the big industrial cutter. There we go. It's a little more glue than is needed or wanted here, but I will spread it out into the drier areas, and it might help with getting these ribbon ends sorted. Now again, I line up on that guideline and make sure that it is nice and flush with the headband and tailband on the ends of the spine, and spread those fingers out into the glue. There we go. It's a good idea when you're assembling things like this to just do a mental checklist and mentally step back a moment, maybe even physically step back. Have a look at it and say, okay, is everything in place where it should be? Is this going to sit how I want it to? If it's supposed to be symmetrical, is anything out of balance? With ribbons, like the ribbon tabs, this is an easy place for one cover or another to slip a little higher or a little lower because of the way the bands angle out and attach to the front. Whereas with this one that's frayed out into strings, into almost threads, it's much easier to keep things stable. But I just make sure I've got enough room for the hinge. And on comes Frank. Lining him up as best I can because it's a bit tacky, and once that's down, it is down. You can pull it up, but then you're backing up several steps. Lots to fix. I'll pull all the threads out of place and throw a bunch of things out of alignment, but it's good. We'll put a bit of a protector on there and a nice block for weight. There we go. Everything looks good. Nice and solid. Measure the width of the book, the thickness of it, including the spine, and we get about 3 centimeters there. For Imperial, you go about an inch and an eighth. I have some scrap board here that's in a nice long strip, so I'll use it up. I like to use the little bits up as much as I can, but there are always more. Use the back of this other board to make sure that the measurement is at right angles. Get it as accurate as I can get it. It's not my strong point with the cutting, so I need to be extra careful. Little extra care measuring saves having to redo steps and recut pieces. So in the long run, I think it probably saves time. Checking to make sure that other side is nice and straight, and for the most part it is. It has a little flaw in it, but I can take care of that later. Line that ruler up as precisely as I can. And there's my guideline for cutting. I didn't go all the way down there because it only needs to be as long as the book is tall. Best way to measure that is on the book itself. Always better to measure against the thing that you are attaching it to if you have the choice. Sometimes it's just too awkward. But it works really well if you can do it. And here we can. I think I captured some emotion in the eyes of the monster on the front of the book there. I hope that holds true once the leather gets on it. Yeah, that's the right length. So I can take off this excess. Always better to do 3 or 4 light passes than try and do heavier ones and cut more quickly, because that tends to slide the ruler around. That is a good fit. We've got the thicker and the thinner board there. One on the left's a little thicker. It's hard to tell on the video. But that's the one that I want for the bands. So I'm going to cut a section that's the same width as the spine. The spine isn't rounded, which helps. Trying to round this gray board can be tricky because it likes to split apart. It's made in layers. I don't need to cut all the way down, because all I need about 5 centimeters. Each band is a centimeter thick or wide or tall, however you want to measure it. So I use my mat, line it up to make sure it's square, mark the 1 centimeter area, and straight across. Now, because I have it in place, I'm not cutting all the way through yet. I'm just doing the first initial cut for each one. Also helps me see that everything is uniform size. The lines are reasonably straight. The thing with handmade products is the slight little flaws actually are part of what makes the product special. If it looks like it came right from a factory, it might as well be right from a factory. In my view, anyway. You want a bit of the maker's hand in it. You want to see that this was actually made by a craftsperson. Part of the charm of this handmade book. So I have the little guideline. I don't need the ruler as long as I don't press too hard. Which I started to do there and started to go astray, so I corrected. And there we go. 1 false band. 2 false bands. And 3. Four. And 5. You can be very technical about widths and placement and that. I tend just to eyeball it, get a good artistic feel for it. It's my Japanese push knife. Great for putting a little beveled edge on these. You can do without it, but it is a nice little refinement. You don't need one of these Japanese knives to do this if you're a bit skillful with a craft knife. Maybe with a cutting board or something like that, you can put it at the edge of a counter and get the right angle. You want about 45 degrees or a little steeper. Spin them all around and do the other end. You can have them or not have them, but I don't recommend having half of it beveled and half not. Others may not immediately notice, but you will. And this book is a lot about what's hidden inside. Fits with the theme of this monster. He's only a monster because we made him so. Bit of a spoiler alert there, maybe. Again, if you haven't read it, it's worth the read. It is of its era. So some might not find it the easiest read, but the language is very modern. It shouldn't be difficult from that respect. But the writing style is a bit flowery. There we go. That's going to be a nice feel there. And just to make sure that when I glue them on, they're in the right spot, put a little guideline on each one. I'll take my stubby, chopped up glue brush. You don't need a lot of glue here, but if you have extra and some squishes out, it can always be trimmed or picked away afterward. You definitely don't want too little. You want this to be able to grip there right through the process of tying down the leather onto the spine. And we'll clean this up. Get any little bits out of the way. It's time to put it on the book. Now you'll notice that the right-hand end of that spine, there's a bit of extra room between the false band and the end of it. I didn't put it on quite symmetrically, which I don't mind, but I do want that wider bit to go on the bottom. So I start putting the glue on. Start putting that on. That's when I spot, oh, there's a bit of a problem here, I think. And it's early enough to flip it around. And because it's the bottom, it becomes less noticeable that there's a little bit of what would otherwise be considered a flaw, but who knows? I could have done that on purpose. Might be a nice little place to put the year at the bottom, even the 1818 year of publication. You are the master of your bindery. If something happens and you want to turn a flaw into a benefit or a bonus, have at it. Some of the coolest things I've done were results of mistakes that are pushed through into something better. Which is not a theme of Frankenstein. Now here I'm just tying it down in the clamp, using the ruler to even out the pressure. Bit of a clumsy afternoon for me, if I'm honest. And tie it up. That'll do the trick. It's a bit loose, especially at the left end there. I didn't want to really crank it up, but as it happens, it's not as tight as I want it to be. So, I'm Gonna take the bone folder and feed it in where there's some looseness to the strings, and then slide it up to that corner and tighten up that tension. There we go. Now that thing's got some downward pressure on it. Make sure everything's lined up. As long as that glue hasn't dried, it's not too late to adjust, but once it's dry, this kind of glue is not going to let you fix it. A little high-speed cleanup. Let's have a look. All right, we'll take the strings off. It's like Christmas morning. Looks good so far. Everything's nice and aligned. Let's see, make sure there's enough room there for the cover to open nicely. Yeah, let's see if it will lie flat front and back cover. Yep. So no matter where it's open to in the book, those at least structurally can lie open, and then the leather might hold them in and keep them in a bit of a V. But we know it's not the cardboard doing it. That's key. Now, a good amount of space all the way around the outside edge. Good little gap there. But up here on the top, we have a bit of a misalignment, just by a millimeter or so. Not a big deal, but since it's also not a big deal to fix it, we'll fix it. And that'll give us a nice smooth top rather than risking it looking lumpy or angled. We'll just take a little bit off of there. The board pushed out to the left a little bit, but I didn't want to risk marring the edge of the text block, so I'm okay with that. I can just push it back into place. Nice and smooth. And that way when we put the leather on, we will have a chance to glue it and keep it nice and tight. But in the meantime, we won't have put any of the green edge of the text block in danger. Wouldn't want to actually skitter this knife across it. Even briefly, it'll take the paint off and gouge the paper out and cause a bigger problem than this would have been had we not fixed it. But hanging off the edge, I could probably use a new blade in that cutter. But we'll take the fluffy hanging off bits off with the scissors. There we go. That's what we want. Okay, that was the only issue that I saw. Everything else looks good. Our structure of the book, except for the leather and the decoration, is pretty much done. So many things have been going wrong with this book. Not even accidental things. It's mostly order of operations things. I made a list when I first started bookbinding, right from the top all the way through down to the end of a book. And I followed it like an airline pilot follows his pre-flight checklist, even though he's flown, or she has flown, thousands of times. It's something that's really important to do, because something as simple as forgetting to put the bookmark in or the bookends in at the right place at the right time, and then suddenly you find you've got to do it around other things. It's a real pain. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to reinstate my list, and I'm going to make that available to you as well if you want to use it. But also I was thinking, things did not go well for Frankenstein. he tried to overcome death and instead created something that looked to him as if he's God and wanted him to look after it as if he's God, at least to the best of Victor Frankenstein's ability. And since he wasn't able to do that, wasn't willing to do that, things went bad. Things went bad really quickly. And having done the science without taking the responsibility for it, it's a theme that rings true today as well. If you look at genetics, if you look at AI, all, I think, wonderful things, but it's something that we need to tread carefully because it can have far-reaching effects that are difficult, if not impossible, to undo. So, thematically with the book, it's been a bit brutal, but it's been fun too, and we're nearing the end now. I'm just finishing up the interior of the book, the covers, the spine have gone on, and then we're into the leather, and we should have our first official book for our luxury library that I hope you're starting along with me, and I hope we're all gonna have a great time making it. So we'll see you in the next video. Have a great week.